Good morning. Because to help you guys out a little bit in your outline, I wrote in the summer notes of all the verses I'll be using, and it's kind of my structure. I was trying to do the wheel back there, but I couldn't really see the TV over there, so it's hard for me to do. So usually when I come up for these lessons, I try to have a central point or a chapter or something I want to focus on. And this time I kind of focus on a question that I keep hearing from people, and last couple of years I think everybody probably heard is because the coronavirus, how people should stop going to church, how there's always things change since then. But I seldom hear any solution to that issue. There's always just the good old days. Things used to be different. But, we look through the Bible, there's been bad things that happen, and, the excuse get in their way. So when I was trying to make a comparison to this, I was thinking that, the way my mind works is kind of different, and I was thinking about the old Rocky movies and how it knocked down, and because I enjoy because of the old boxers, because of Joe Louis, Larry Holmes, Old Fraser, George Foreman, Mike Tyson, Jack Dempsey, and what I find interesting about each of them are considered greats, but they all have a loss on their record. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with modern boxing, but there's an astounding amount of undefeated boxers. Is because they take these money matches to boost their record, and all they care about is their record being untarnished, but they don't go through the journey of being defeated and walking up. And one of my favorite quotes is from Mike Tyson is, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." And in the thing about life, that you're going to get hit, you can try your best to avoid problems. You can try your best to pretend they're not there. But it's when you fall, because what are you going to do when you fall? Are you going to get back up? So one hindering habit that I know people struggle with is excuse making. Because you can call it what you want. You can call it justification, rationalizing. Because no matter what you call it, a lot of times, it's just an excuse. I know there's legitimate reasons. And I wonder sometimes, because how many times that because we try to do something, it's just mass an excuse. Somebody asks you to do something, it's just, because something that I find interesting, that sometimes people will work harder on their excuse than actually doing the thing that you asked of them. And I was thinking back, and I can remember a story when I was working in, when I was working in North Dakota, and I was a hydrogen tester. I don't know how many of you are familiar with how that life kind of works. It's basically, you leave the yard at 6 o'clock, you get there 30, 40 minutes, you start filling out paperwork, one call, JSAs, all the safety stuff, and then you gotta call the company man, and then you gotta wait for him. So then usually it's 7, almost 8 o'clock, and we have like a safety meeting. So sometimes we work for 30 minutes for our first break, and so I had this one helper, and every single time I would always fill out the paperwork, I would make the calls, and I would do all that, and he would be on his cell phone, or he'd be sleeping. And every single time we would finish the JSA meeting, he would sneak out of there, and he would go to the porta john. And today I kind of had enough of it. It's been going on for longer than I should probably would have. Wow. And then I had my crescent wrench, and I banged on the door. I said, "Get out of there." I said, "You're not going to poop on my time." And doing that kind of thinking, my anger got to me, and then I got a nickname of that. They call me the poop Nazi. And funny thing about that is I had to go talk to the HR because they said you can't tell people they can't poop. So, you know. So, well, because it's unfortunate, well, because a lot of people talk about excuses when it comes to matter of faith. I'm too busy. I don't need to read the Bible because I don't understand it. Well, because I will get right with God, but I got too much in my life going on right now. Because later will be better. And I think some people especially deceive themselves when it comes to some excuses. Well, because they come up reasons why not to attend worship services. Well, so why do they make excuses, especially when it comes to matter of faith? Well, on your outline, I kind of listed up, I like numbers 4 if you can't tell, and the 4 reasons why people make excuse. Number 1, blame. Well, to get out of trouble. Well, because if you can blame someone or something, you can blame your parents, you can blame the weather, or maybe I'll just blame you. Well, because if I can take the blame off myself and put it on someone else, just to get out of trouble, we'll probably do that. Well, because people do this all the time. It isn't anything new. Well, because making excuses for mistakes isn't nothing new. Well, because in fact, because we can trace this all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Adam blames God, because who gave him the woman? And because who gave him the fruit? The woman blames the serpent. And the only person not making an excuse in that whole story is the devil, the serpent. And we see that in Genesis 3:12. Well, so my excuse for not doing, because doing something wrong is because it's an attempt, for me not to receive blame, to get out of trouble. Well, because a person who makes a mistake is trying to shift the blame from himself or herself into someone else. But as a Christian, on the other hand, because we should accept responsibility for his or her wrong, confess to them, and ask God for forgiveness. If we look in 1 John chapter 1, verse 9, because if we confess our sin, he is faithful and righteous, forgive us of our sin, and cleanse of all righteousness. On number 2, denial. To deny the personal problem. Well, so if we look in Exodus, because Exodus 32, 21 through 25, it talks about Aaron. Because Aaron made a couple excuses in the Bible in order to deny his own part in the golden calf that he had built to worship in the wilderness. Well, because if you remember the story well, how Moses had gone up to the mountains and talked to God. And while he was gone, the people grew impatient. And they were doubtful, and they told Aaron to make us a god for them. And Aaron caved into peer pressure and instructed the people how to build the idol. And when Moses came down from the mount, he was irate. Because he broke the stone tablet, he burned the idol, he grinded up the powder, and he made the sons of Israel drink it. And he says to Aaron, because what did you do this? Because you know that you have brought great sin upon them? So in other words, so what is your excuse for this wickedness? Because if you notice that Aaron never accepted personal responsibility for what he's building. We see in verse 22, the first excuse, because do not let your anger, because of my Lord burn. Because you know the people yourself are prone to evil. In other words, it's not my fault, it's the people's fault. Excuse number 2, I threw it, the goat, into the fire, and it became the calf, verse 24. The second excuse is worse than the first problem. Because the real problem is that, because Aaron let it get out of control. He was supposed to be their leader. He was supposed to be the high priest, but he failed the people as their leader. And, because rather than accept responsibility for his failure, he denied his sins. If we see in Proverbs, verse 30, verse 12, because there's a kind of pure in his own eyes, but yet is, because washed from his filthiness. Because I know it's easy to blame others for excuses for evil thoughts or wrong action. Excuses just like, it's the other person's fault. I couldn't help it. Everyone else is doing it. It was just a mistake. No one's perfect. Because you made me do it. I was pressured into it. I did nothing wrong. God is tempting me. So all these excuses are denial of personal problem. Like we see in Proverbs 30, verse 20. Because it's like the adulterous woman. And she eats and wiped her mouth and said, I have done no wrong. And I know many of us know this in 1 John chapter 1, verse 8. And it says, if these have no sin, we are deceiving ourselves because the truth is not in us. Number 3, avoidance. Well, to get out of responsibility. There's an example again in, because in Exodus. We can look in Exodus chapter 3, verse 11, and continue in chapter 4. This example of the life of Moses. God has spared Moses' life as a baby. He trained him in the house of Pharaoh, and he blessed him with, because which is the breast in Egypt. He blessed him with great responsibility, and because it was time for Moses to take his talent for God now. It was his duty. It was his obligation. It was his responsibility. And God says to Moses, come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, and because you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt. Well, but Moses did not want to take responsibility. And when the time comes up, he makes one excuse after another. And we see in chapter 1, verse 11, he says, because I'm not able to. I do not have the talent. In chapter 4, verse 1, because they won't believe in me. Verse 10, I'm not a good speaker. Verse 13, someone else can do it. Well, so at this point in the text, then the anger of the Lord burns against Moses. We can see that in Exodus 4, verse 14. One of my favorite quotes from Benjamin Franklin once said, because he is good at making excuses, is seldom good at anything else. So point number 4, because excuses keep me from something I don't want to do. Have you ever been asked, to do something for someone, to take on a job, and you just don't want to do it? Surely you've been asked to do something you didn't want to do. Because you can think how many times when it comes to obeying the Lord that you hear excuses, the people deep down, they just don't want to obey God. And we can look in Luke chapter 14 for 18 through 20, because when Jesus told this parable, because illustrate us because God's will. Because the proverb is about a man who's given a big dinner, and he invites everyone to come. But you can see they start making excuses. In verse 18, he said, because I have brought a piece of line, I need to go out and look after it. Please consider me excuse. Verse 19, I have brought 5 yoke of oxen, and I need to take them. Please consider me excuse. Verse 20, I have married a wife, and for this reason I cannot come. So all these people could have come to the feast, but they just didn't want to. And that's the point of the parable. Do you see yourself in the excuses? Are you making up excuses to get out of trouble, to blame others, to deny the problem, or to avoid your responsibility? Or just deep down, you just don't want to obey God? So let us consider ways that we can stop making excuses. Number 1, because making excuses hindering people from seeing solutions. Because you may become focused as because why you can't instead of how you can. In fact, the habit of making excuses is keeping one focused on the obstacles. We can see in Numbers chapter 13, verses 28 and 33. Because it's just like the 10 out of 11 spies that went, because we're sitting in Canaan's land. And they began making excuses why they couldn't think of ways that they could conquer the land that God had promised them. Because the people were strong. The cities were fortified. It was very large. Because we'd be like grasshopper crushed in their own sight. Because it's unfortunate that sometimes excuse destroys our life for so many people. In the book I recently read called The Skilled Helper, that it wrote, because avoiding behavior is an excuse that consecrates a great deal of a psychology of being average. So number 2, well, because making excuses turn people into victims instead of victors. Well, we can see in Proverbs verses 22, verse 13, because a slothful man says they're lying outside and I will be killed in the street. So excuses can be like nails to build a house of failure, and the poor workman will find faults in his own tools. Number 3, well, because making excuses reveals the lack of faith. That if we can look in Judges 6, well, because Gildan was called out as a violent warrior of the God, and he was given a challenge, well, that leads God people out of oppression and defeat the Amalekites. And when it came to his mission, he began to make excuses. In Judges 6, verses 15, O Lord, how should I deliver Israel? Behold, my family is least, and I'm the youngest of my father's house. And well, because if the Lord says you're something, you shouldn't really argue with him. If he says you're a violent warrior, then you really shouldn't argue with him. The scriptures tell us that we are more than conquerors. We can see that in Romans 8, verses 37. If you have faith, because be the warrior he made you to be. And we see that God doesn't accept excuses. We can see a sample of that in Matthew 25, through 24, through 26. Because once a talented man that offered excuses, and the master, because he rejected his excuses. Master answered, said that you are a wicked and lazy slave. And because this man was wicked and lazy. We can see another example, mention this in Romans 1, verses 20. And from the sense of a creation of this world, because all his invisible attributes, eternal power and divine nature, that you can clearly see, and he understood that what he has made, and he did without excuse. We can hear Jesus talking about this in John chapter 15, verses 22. When Jesus talked to his disciples, is how the world would reject him. And because they would reject him because of their spiritual blindness and their stubborn hearts. Because if I have not come and spoke to them, because they would not have been guilty of sin, but now I have, they have no excuse for their sin. So now, because why do I make excuse? Because why should I stop making excuses? Because I have done it for such a long time, it become a habit. So how do I break this destructional habit? How to overcome excuses? Well, I think we shouldn't wait for the perfect solution, because the perfect time before you take action. Because waiting for the perfect ideal situation is common hindrance to many people. Of course, there's sometimes better than others to do certain things, but because you just can't sit and wait around for the perfect day. Because at some point, because you just got to go do it. Because it's inconvenient. And I know some folks say that good things come to those that wait. That might be true in some cases. But many more good things for those who get the leftovers and hustle to get things done. Because a person who really wants to find a way to do something, he'll do it. The other person will find an excuse. Number 2, have faith that you can do all things. We see an example in this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. Rather than complain about his circumstances or make excuse, Paul wrote, I can do all things for him who strengthens me. So to overcome excuses, it will help us to start believing in yourself and in God, instead of down yourself and God. Because by overcoming excuses, because you'll gain confidence and you will overcome instead of being overwhelmed. But when you make excuses and you repeat them so often, they become a belief. Because this belief become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So be like Paul. And believe that you can do all things through him who strengthens you. So number 3. Because realize there is potential that God has given us. Because we are responsible, for not what we have, because we are responsible for not what we have, but what we can have. For not what we are, but what we can become. We can see in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, for God who has given the Spirit to Timothy, but the power of love and discipline. Do you believe in this verse? Do you live like it? And because we can see in Malachi chapter 3 through 8. Because while the false prophet of Israel were making excuses, but the prophet Malachi, which means like Jehovah, is filled with the power of the Spirit through our Lord, and with the justice and courage. So next time you feel tempted to make excuse, remember the Spirit is with you through the good news and through the Bible He has left us, the Word. So you need to ask God to help you to stop making excuses. Because we can see this example in Jeremiah chapter 1 through 7. Now in the words of the Lord that came to you, saying, before I was formed in your womb, I knew you, but before you were born, I consecrated you, and I appointed you the prophet to all nations. And then I said, alas, Lord, behold, I do not know how to speak, because I am youth. Was an excuse. But then the Lord says to him, do not say you're youth, because everywhere I send you, you shall go, and I will command you, and you shall speak. So God denied his excuse. So we need to start looking for solutions instead of seeing problems and everything. So we don't need to find an excuse, we need to find a way. Because this will change your mindset from a pessimist to awesomeness. We can see an example of this at John chapter 9, 6 through 9. So when Jesus saw him laying there, and he knew he'd already been there for a long time in that condition, and he said to him, do you wish to get well? And the sick man answered, sir, I have no man to put me in the pool of water that is stirred. But when I am coming, another step shall be down. And Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your pallet and walk. And immediately the man got well, and he picked up his pallet and began to walk. So in conclusion to this lesson this morning, because there's quite a bit of history that will give us excuses not to get right with God. Because our enemy is the master excuse maker. Examples just like, because why will we get with God today? Later will be better. I got too much going on in my life. I can't think about eternity now. I'm too shy to talk to others about getting my life right with God. What will people think of me? I don't like people to notice me. I can never live up to such expectations. Because my childhood was rough. I wasn't born in the church. They want to set me. I got too much going on with my job right now. I can't think about going to church. So if you need an excuse, you don't have to look on the internet. There's plenty of them out there. But it will cost you a life of mediocrity. It will cost you your life of defeat and a life of your potential never been actualized. It will cost you eternity. We can see in Acts chapter 17, verses 32. And because Paul was preaching in Athens on Mars Hill, and because some were pressing a great opportunity. And when they had heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, while others, they wanted to hear again on the subject. I do not know why they sneered or what their excuse were for not listening. But I do wonder what was so pressing that they gave up their salvation. So I ask you, do not make this mistake. Do not use their excuses. I ask you to get right with the Lord and do it now, because today is the Lord's day. And if there's anything you need at this time, I ask you to come forward.